Hello, dear learners. Today, I welcome you in which I'll be talking about a new topic, society and environment. So let's first have a overview of this particular session. So you'll be exploring the relationship between society, religion and environmental ethics in India. Later on, you'll be also examining how Hinduism, Islam, Jainism, Buddhism and the indigenous tradition, they're promoting harmony with nature through their moral, spiritual and practical approach. And lastly, it will help you to comprehend how the community-based conservation methods, the indigenous knowledges and the sustainable practices are so vital and important for addressing the modern ecological challenges. Okay? So let's begin. Now, coming to the society's perception of natural resources and environment. Now, you have to understand that across the globe, India is regarded as a very diverse nation, right? In terms of biodiversity, geoclimate, religion, philosophy, and the whole country is very deep rooted in the protection of environment through moral obligation and ethical norms. And the natural conservation has been reflected in various traditional practices. And we will see in a little while how even our religious belief, our rituals, our folklores and arts and craft, and even our daily lives, they are all revolving around, to lead a sustainable life and to protect and conserve our environment. So it has been seen that most of the forest areas were conserved by traditional societies with their socio-cultural and religious practices. So in modern times, most of these traditions and cultures have been, of course, encroached with a lot of greed for development and so on. But it's high time that we, move back again. We try to protect the environment through our traditions, through our culture that actually already was into it for protecting the environment. So this is the only way in which we can deal with the world's continuous environmental challenges and the different risks that we are facing all around. Okay. So coming to the part in which we have to also understand why Indian religious philosophies and environmental protections are so intrinsically linked. You cannot separate them because respecting your nature is inherent in all the religions, in all our faith. And there's so many, if you look into Hindu religion, there are many god and goddesses which are shown, which are basically depicted by the natural resources, by animals and different kind of, resources, and the sacred groves or sacred forests which are preserved because we respect them and they are part of that particular Hindu or Buddhist culture. Same with Christianity and Islam. The conservation of the environment is based on the principle that nature and its component are created by God. And humans are entrusted with the responsibility of protecting it. So religion practice in India, be it Hinduism, Jainism, Buddhism and Sikhism, all are offering some ethical guidelines. And the guidelines are basically telling us how to live in harmony with the nature. So these framework, if you look very closely, they are rooted in some concept. So the three concepts are the dharma, that means righteous conduct, the karma, that is law of cause and effect, and you can say the concept of ahimsa, that is non-violence, which collectively, what is it promoting? A sense of responsibility towards the natural environment. Even saints, the Sufis and the priest, they often act as a custodian of this wisdom by promoting, environmental awareness and ethical behavior through their teaching and sermons and their actions as well. So you see the conceptual map here. Now the conceptual map clearly shows that your religious beliefs and spiritual beliefs, how it basically the ceremonial practices and the prohibitive practices, how both of them, they are contributing ultimately, directly or indirectly, they're contributing to environmental conservation, right? First, let's look at Hinduism and the environmental ethics that follows it. How Hinduism emphasizes the environmental ethics through, like I said, the concept of ahimsa, dharma, righteousness. which views nature as sacred and interconnected. So much so that it holds the view that the universe is like a God's body and humans are a part of it and not separate from the nature. And even more, if you look in depth in the Hindu philosophy, we do find that it talks that humans are made up of 5 vital components. We have Prithvi, the Mother Earth, Varuna Devta, the Lord of Water. We have Vayu Devta, the Lord of Winds, Agni Devta, Lord of Fire, and Akash, that is Lord of Light or Sky. Now, as a result, even like the felling of trees, the polluting of air, water, land, all the different kind of pollutions are considered as sins. Why? Because these are the aspects in which we are, defiling the nature. And everyone has a responsibility to protect and to conserve these 5 components. And the whole messages, if you want to look into the messages of the environmental conservation, just in a little while, I'll be giving you the examples also. You can see the text, the scripts of Vedic, the Puranic literature, the Upanishads, the Arthashastra, the Charak Samhita, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. They all are laden with what we call as the messages which are highlighting the Hindu religious philosophy, which is highlighting the environmental conservation as well. So this is the 2 examples from the shloka of, we can say 3.10 and 17.14. These are the 2 examples from the holy book, that is the Gita. And you can see this, it is talking about the Brahma created humankind along with duties and said, prosper in the performance of these yajnas, that is the sacrifices, for they shall bestow upon you all you wish to achieve. So this verse suggests that human actions, including those related to the environment, should be performed with a sense of the sense of purpose and responsibility, and it should align with the natural order, right? Same way with the second example, how this verse is actually highlighting cleanliness, simplicity, and non-violence. So you see, the Bhagavad Gita, it advocates for living in harmony with nature and not exploiting it for our personal gains as well. Then in ancient India, if you look into it, the ancient sages and the cultural practices, they also emphasizing the caring for flora and fauna, the Prakriti, that is the human, the mother nature, with wisdom which is passed down from cultural rituals, folk tales, songs, poems, festivals, and devotional observance as well. So the ancient Indian text, we have the Vedas and Upanishads, which also have a lot of hymns and philosophical discourse that celebrate the divine presence in nature. Now, this reverence or this respect that we show for the nature, it permeates various aspects of our Indian life as well, right? Including, or it also influences our ethical consideration, how we are managing the resources, and our artistic expression as well. So, in the ancient text, it gives a simple definition of 5 important trees. It has placed very important, you can say, emphasis on this Panchavati, that is banyan, peepal, ashoka, bale, and harad. And these trees are regarded as holy owing to their therapeutic capabilities. Now, these trees are still revered by us now, and we are still benefiting from these trees. So the concept of keeping the forest reserve was also seen in Kautilya's Arthashastra, who was an Indian scholar at that time. Even the Emperor Ashoka, he was the first one who talked about protecting the wildlife and the trees of the forest. Then if we come to the conservation of nature in the medieval India, now if you look at the Mughal Emperor Babur's memos, that is Baburnama, or the Guru Nanak's hymn on Bharma Saha, that is how different seasons were depicting each month with a dominant image, right? And let's not forget about Bishnoi movement. You all must have studied about Chipko movement during your school stage, right? School age in EVS. But the roots of the Chipko movements were from the Bishnoi community. and the Bishnoi movement, which was led by men and women. Why? Because they were resisting against the cutting and felling of khijri trees. And what they did is the women of that village, they gathered around the tree, they hugged the trees and they held together so that at that time, whoever the ruler was that of that Khijri village in Rajasthan, that he was not allowed to cut the tree. And ultimately, the ruler was moved and he cancelled his order of cutting the trees as well. Then coming to the Vedic intervention towards environmental ethics. Now, the first environmental protection philosophy, it dates back to the Vedic era, right? Where the worship of nature has just begun. Now, the Vedic texts have a very copious number of hymns and they're dedicated to the preservation of ecological balance. And of course, there are very different verses also, prayers and hymns which are found in Vedas, which are also forms the basis of the ethical aspect of how we are supposed to conserve the environment. And despite the fact that India has endured with numerous rivers, so much, abundant rainfall, ancient Indian thinkers, they pushed for smart water management at that time. And they talked about that during that time. And it is also mentioned, if you look into the Vedic text, you can see the shades of the smart water management at that time. So here is an example of the Vedic intervention towards environmental ethics. Just take a pause the slide and look at the different example of how these different extracts from the different books of Rig Veda and Atharva Veda, Vajur Veda and Rig Veda, it has extracted, and talked about Vasudeva Kutumbakam, that is talked about the whole family, whole world as one family and so on. And you can see that each and in every, you can say, extract, it is reflecting how we are supposed to protect our environment. Now let's come to the other religion, that is Islam and the environmental ethics. So even if you come look into the Islamic law, it talks about the basic element of nature, land, water, fire, forest and light, which belong to all living beings and not just human beings, right? Even the Holy Book and the Sunnah are the guiding light to promote sustainable development. And Allah, the Almighty, He commanded human beings to avoid doing any mischievous things with the resources and even to waste the resources, because this was an act which caused great destruction and degradation to the environment. So much so that the privilege to exploit natural resources was given to mankind on the guardianship basis, which implies the right to use another person's property on the promise that he will not damage it or destroy it or reduce its quality. So you see, the shade of sustainable development is already being visible through these through the different religious texts as well. Remember the famous quote, "We have not inherited the world from our father, but we have borrowed it from our children." This shows that how we are supposed to return everything back again in intact form, quantity and quality wise. Then even these are take a pause. Now you can go through these all the different extracts from the Holy Book Quran, in which it shows, it reflects how God Almighty has talked about, environment and protecting environment, even talking about wastage and even talking about extravagant people, that God does not like extravagant people. And here I would also like to quote the very famous quote of Mahatma Gandhi, that earth provides enough to satisfy every man's need, but not every man's greed, right? A very famous quote which shows the imbalance between consumption and natural resources as well. Then even the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, his teachings also reflected so much of the sustainable, how to lead a sustainable lifestyle, and gave a great importance on the sustainable cultivation of land, how to manage waste minimization, humane treatment to animals, and preservation of natural resources as well. And these are the famous, you can say, the sayings of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, regarding environmental sustainability. How the world is beautiful and verdant, and verily God, be He exalted, has made you His reward in it, and He sees how you equate yourself. So whoever plants a tree and diligently looks after it until it matures and bears fruit is ultimately rewarded. So for every action that you do, you will be rewarded. Now coming to Jainism, how Lord Mahavir's entire life was full of compassion, and he wasn't living at still a live. You can say that his exemplified living style, you can say it was a perfect harmony with nature and provided utmost respect for the environment. And of course, the core principle was what? Ahimsa, non-violence. So it advocated respect and compassion towards all living creatures, which includes, plants, animals, and even the elements like air, water, which promotes a lifestyle, right? Moreover, if you look at the Jain monks, they're strictly vegetarian. They just don't want anybody to harm the animals for feeding themselves. And they also practice self-restraint and avoid waste. And in 1990, you'll be so surprised that WWF Network on Conservation and Religion, it took such a significant step in the Jains community and in its commitment for environmental protection. So if you look at Jainism and environmental ethics, so of course they're talking about compassion, they're talking about kindness, they're talking about not to waste any materials, and of course promoting a life with lot of simplicity, with lot of detachment, not to be attached to the material aspect of it. And of course this is encouraging what we call as a responsible consumption and a resource management as well. Now coming to Buddhism and environmental ethics. So Buddhism also emphasizes environmental ethics through concepts like non-harming, ahimsa, compassion for all living beings, and the interconnectedness of all things. So even if you look at the core principle of Buddhism, ahimsa extends beyond humans to encompass all living beings, promoting a lifestyle basically that minimizes the harm to the environment as well. So Buddhist teaching emphasizes the interconnectedness of all things. Plus, it also talks the concept of karma, where actions have a consequences. So it promotes compassion and loving kindness towards all living, which naturally extends to the natural world. So if you look at how Lord Buddha, he identified the environment as a dear friend. He always motivated his followers to protect the environment, as the environment is a friend of man, and it is a duty to protect its beauty. And of course, to pay respect to the sacred rivers, trees, and even the different water resources. So admiring the beauty of the environment is a factor in environmental protection. Then coming to the role played by the Indian society towards environmental sustainability. So it's needless to say, you can understand how the Chipko movement, just like I talked about Chipko movement, how it symbolized the whole environmental campaign, the Epico movement, right? And even the renowned philosophers like Mahatma Gandhi, Rabindranath Tagore, Swami Vivekananda, they all showed such great contribution to environmental ethics and sustainability through the concept like ahimsa, respect for nature, and interconnectedness. And the Indian society, if you look at our cultural and religious practice also, here how River Ganga is basically worshipped as goddess, and how you're basically taking that effort in order to preserve the sanctity, the purity of that particular resource. The same equally significant is the Kumbh Mela, which is a largest spiritual gathering on the earth, which also highlights both the spiritual value of rivers and the environmental challenges that goes along with it. Then coming to the indigenous knowledge, now which is an integral part of the culture and the history of the local people. We need to learn from the local community, reason being because they're more close to the environment, and the community is enriched with that knowledge that the environment is providing. So there are different terminology. For example, you can call it as traditional knowledge, you can call it as indigenous technical knowledge, local knowledge, and even indigenous knowledge system. So it is used basically by the local people, and ultimately we are using their experience in order to protect the environment as well. So if you look at the indigenous knowledge, the Convention of Biological Diversity, it acknowledges the value how inventions, how knowledge and practices of this indigenous and local community is basically the only sustainable solution for protecting the biodiversity. So if you look at the benefits and their conservation, the whole cultural communication, which is done through, traditional folk songs, the folk tales, legends and rituals, even the proverbs, they provide a living example how this is, the culture is transmitted from one generation to generation. And the whole community, it is, connected through, you can say, these proverbs and these folklores and legends. And all the different discoveries that were made regarding medicinal plants, the fodder, the subsidiary, you can say food, the wild plants, all that was due to the indigenous people who lived so close to the nature, and they provided all the information. So much so that even the indigenous, you can say, pedological knowledge, the knowledge related to the soil, was also being provided by the local community. How the soil typology, how its structure, fertility was suitable for growing any particular kind of a crop. And that's how we also understood the whole agricultural process as well. Then coming to the indigenous knowledge of water, how we were basically able to, store water, or what was the traditional water conservation technique. We saw that even in the Harappan civilization and even the Mohenjo-daro, the water harvesting can be traced back to the human history as far as the origination of agriculture, it started taking places. So of course we have the rituals, we have the village tanks, which were a sacred resources for villagers to maintain and to honor this particular tank as well. So lastly, if you look at the recommendation for how the traditional knowledge was shielding, or how it was basically, providing the biological or the biodiversity conservation strategies, it was in the form of, you can say that how it helped in reversing the decline of the species, maintaining ecological integrity, and how they were framing strict laws and applying genetic techniques to preserve the endangered species as well. And the strategies for conserving the genetic diversity, we have in situ and ex situ conservation methods, in which plants and animals, their cells, their germplasms, and their gene banks were basically used for the protection of their species. And that's how the whole concept of preservation came from the indigenous knowledge to our modern knowledge as well. So if I conclude the entire lecture that you just heard about the society and the environment, so you will agree with me that India's deep-rooted cultural, spiritual, and ethical tradition, it is all revealing something very profound. It is revealing environmental harmony. It is revealing sustainability. So from Vedic hymn to Ashoka, you can edict, to Jain, Buddhist, and Islamic teaching, all that philosophy, it is basically highlighting the moral duty of human to protect the nature. Not only that, the last part, where I talked about the indigenous practices, that also is exemplifying India's collective environmental consciousness. So you see that the enduring lesson that we understand by this is how we are coexisting, how we are to respect the biodiversity and sustainable living. At the same time, we're also upholding these values. We're ensuring that environmental stewardship, it remains both a spiritual and a civic responsibility, which is helping in preserving and balancing for the future generations to come. So this is the end of the session. These are the recommended reading list in which you can go through it for a more detailed view regarding this particular topic. And I hope you enjoy this particular topic, and then I'll be meeting you again with another brand new topic. Till then, take care of yourself and have a nice day. Bye-bye.